Yes. Sorry about that. I got something to eat.
Okay. Yeah, I started a bit early also because time, because we are all sitting in different places and we are organizing this, so there was
Oh,
little
I
lack of
see.
coordination.
Okay, so it's not all at your university?
No, no, no. We are at different places. Like I am here sitting some, and I'll be introducing you from the university guest house. I'm sitting over there. So we are at
Okay.
different. Some students are there in the room, like conference room. Some students are there, and we are all spread out so that we can hear properly. Well, otherwise, in a
Okay.
room also. So it's really a privilege for me to introduce you, uh,
I
Professor
can't hear
Mani.
you. Sorry.
You're not
Yeah,
able
now,
to hear me.
now I can hear you. I lost you for a minute.
Okay. Professor Malini Johar Schooler is a professor in the Department of English at the University of Florida. She is the author of several books, including The Politics of Voice, Liberalism, and Social Criticism from Franklin to Kingston, US Orientalism, Race, Nation, and Gender in Literature 1792 to 1890. This was published in 1998. Locating Race, Global Sites of Postcolonial Citizenship 2009 publication. And Campaigns of Knowledge, US Pedagogies of Colonialism and Occupation in the Philippines and Japan 2019 publication. The book received Philippines National Book Award in 2022. She has co-edited Messy Beginnings, Postcoloniality and Early American Studies with Edward Watts, 2003 publication. Exceptional State, Contemporary US Culture and the New Imperialism with Ashley Dawson, 2007 publication, and Dangerous Professors, Academic Freedom, and the National Security Campus with Ashley Dawson, 2009. She is the director of an award winning documentary in his own home about police brutality and campus militarization. Currently, she is working on a book for the University of California Press titled Building Solidarity Politics Through Critical Race Reading. Her essay have appeared in scholarly journals such as American Literature, Science, Cultural Critic, American Quarterly, and Genders, as well as in popular publications such as Counterpunch, the Orlando Sentinel, and the Sarasota Herald Tribune. In 2015, she was a Fulbright Scholar in Austria. She has been the full faculty advisor for SJP, Students for Justice in Palestine, on her campus for many years, and she is a member of organizing collective for USACBI, United States Campaign for the Academic and Cultural Boycott of Israel. She teaches courses in Asian American Studies, Comparative Settler Colonialism, Postcolonial Theory, and U.S. Empire Studies. Welcome, Professor Schooler, to this international seminar, and we look forward to hearing you. Your deliberations, we know, will be very valuable, and we are indeed very privileged to have you amidst us today.
Thank
Thank
you very
you.
much for that introduction. I appreciate it, and thank you so much for inviting me to this. I have to say that my thoughts here are preliminary. This is not a worked out paper or anything. So if there is time for discussion, questions, I would appreciate any kind of suggestions that people have and questions. So it's very much a work in progress that I've been thinking about. So thank you. So my talk is indigeneity, sovereignty, survivance, Raja Shahede's Palestinian walks. I will just put up, okay, uh, just so that people can get my information. Uh, yeah, my email in case anybody wants to get in touch and give me some ideas. I would appreciate that. Okay. Um, so I'm going to start with a quote from Yasser Arafat. In 2004, he wrote, can you hear me okay? Can everybody hear me?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay. Do you need me to increase the volume?
No, it's okay. Fine for my end. Fine
All right.
here.
So in 2004, Yasser Arafat wrote, 107 years after the Basel Conference, 90 years after the Sykes-Picot Agreement, Israel has failed to wipe us out. We are here in Palestine facing them. We are not Red Indians. Arafat did not want to think of Palestinians as indigenous because to him it possibly seemed defeatist, given the fact that Indians in North America had lost their struggles for sovereignty, were pushed to reservations, assimilated via boarding schools, and forcibly deprived of their languages. And even though there have been notable acts of resistance, the American Indian movement taking over Alcatraz in the 1970s, and the more recent North Dakota pipeline protests in 2016 and 2017, for instance, Indian resistances are not central to the US nation state as that of Palestine to Israel. Arafat would probably have been happier comparing Palestinians to Indians in India in the national movement, who sent the British colonists home and liberated the homeland from foreign rule. So I'm starting with Arafat's statement today because I want to use the case of Palestine, which is very dear to my heart. And I'm thinking here of the occupied territories rather than the Palestinians of 48 Israel, because I think that's a very different dynamic. To think about indigeneity and sovereignty, their relationship and differences of indigeneity and resistance and settler colonialism. I will also want to touch briefly upon the question.
সবচেয়ে ভালো বিষয় ছিল টোটালটা বাদ দিয়ে আমার ঘরেরটা
Hello, there is some background knowledge, noise. Please see to it that everybody's audio is switched off.
Okay, sorry, I lost my track here. All right, so I'm going to reread that paragraph. So I'm starting with Arafat's statement today because I want to use the case of Palestine, and I'm thinking of the occupied territories rather than the Palestinians of 48 Israel, to think about indigeneity and sovereignty, their relationship and differences of resistance and settler colonialism. I also want to briefly touch upon questions of anthropomorphism and the Anthropocene in relation to settler colonialism. And I'm going to focus in particular on Raja Shehadeh, who is a lawyer and a writer. His memoir called Palestinian Walks, Forays into a Vanishing Landscape, to examine questions of indigenous affirmation through acts of walking, naming, seeing, and feeling. In agreement with scholars such as Lorenzo Veracini and Patrick Wolf, I see Palestinians outside of 48 Israel as very much an indigenous people. Not to say the people in 48 Israel are not indigenous, but their struggles are different. So these are indigenous people fighting a settler colonial state, sharing structural similarities with many indigenous groups in North America, but also clearly with particular differences. And here I am following Patrick Wolf's seminal description of settler colonialism as an ongoing structure of power rather than an event that works through the logic of elimination to systematically expel the indigenous. Settler colonialism is about land, and as Veracini puts it, unlike franchise colonialism, which says, you work for me, settler colonialism says, you go away. And Patrick Wolf further writes about the indigenous. So far as the indigenous people are concerned, where they are is who they are. So land is extremely central. Shehade's Palestinian Walks, published in 2007, a few years after the Second Intifada, is a mixture of what we will traditionally call narrative and non-narrative forms. There's 6 chapters, each recounting a sarha, S-A-R-H-A, or a walk in the hills and countryside around Ramallah, beginning in the late 70s and ending in 2006. The sarhat, which is a plural of sarha, some alone, some in the company of family and friends, move through time and space. Shehadeh writes not only as a lawyer, using expository and argumentative forms, describing the relentless expropriation of land in the West Bank from Palestinians, but also as an indigenous Palestinian whose stories about his kin, family, and friends are central to his descriptions of the landscape around Ramallah, the territory that is increasingly being annexed. So Shehadeh describes the sarha as the following, quote, "To go on a sarha was to roam freely at will, without restraint. A man going on a sarha wanders aimlessly, not restricted by time and place, going where his spirit takes him to nourish his soul," unquote. Structuring his book into these walks, Shehadeh writes, quote, "Each sarha is in the form of a walk that I invite the reader to take with me, where he'll describe what can be seen, heard, and smelled in the hills." So what he is offering is an indigenous knowledge formation that refuses the separation of the logical and the sensuous. His first encounter with what he calls the language of the hills, for instance, is in the law courts, where the landowners present certificates of ownership for unregistered land, which is only described through its physical features. So the book starts with 2 maps, which serve to establish the decolonial and indigenous epistemologies that the book brings into being. And I'll need to screen share here for a minute. Okay. All right. Can you see that? Can people see that?
Yes.
Okay. So the first is a map of the northern and central West Bank. If you can see this map, and then I'll move to the, how do I move? Okay. Which just lists the names of places.
And now,
sorry?
Now it is not visible.
It's not visible?
No. It was there, then it like went away.
Oh, what happened? Okay, I can start again. Sorry. I'm doing the screen share. Can you see it? Can you see that?
No, not at present. Oh,
Sorry?
okay, then it's fine. If others can see it, maybe something to do with my connection. I'm not
Okay.
able to see it. Okay, thanks.
Okay.
You can continue. I'll try from my end.
All right. So you're seeing here the separation wall, the green line. And it's a map with different places listed. Then if you go to the next map, just tell me if you can see that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we can.
So, okay. The second one is of Ramallah and the surrounding countryside. but it's clear that the difference between the two is not just one of scale, even though this is a much larger scale map. So the first map, which I'll do here, it follows the conventions of Cartesian cartography, practice used by colonizers to claim space. Temporality, history, and space are not related. And the second one is an agential map. It's a narrative cartography that defies the spatial self-sufficiency of colonial cartography, mixing the colonial present and the indigenous past, nature and settlement, the structural and the personal. The map of Ramallah and the countryside includes graphics of present-day Israeli settlements, incursions into the West Bank, which belie the official map, alongside past structures such as Abu Amin's Qasr, to which I will talk about later, the Arabic names of the hills, which British colonizers eagerly appropriated in their knowledge repertoire as a means to control, and they are re-narrated and marked by Shehade's account of his sarhas. And the violence of occupation is marked through a picture of an Israeli settler, which I hope you can see, with a gun, and the bombed out police station where his nephew picks up an unexploded missile. Okay. So if colonial cartography denudes space of subjectivity and affect, Shehade's cartography populates it with both the human and the more than human through his narration of it, thus intimately claiming space. And I'll talk more about this claiming in a minute. So if for Patrick Wolf, who has argued that territoriality is the settler colonialism's specific irreducible element, Shehade's recognition of this spurs him to constantly erase this territoriality by putting in motion his roaming of the land, even as it becomes increasingly fraught. So each of the chapters narrates a sarha or walk that both connects the speaker to the land and different parts of space to each other. So while the titles of the chapters describe an event or memory, I'm going to share again, hopefully this will work. So here are the chapter titles. The subtitles denote the connecting of different spaces to each other through the act of walking. So the pale god of the hills is a family friend who builds a kasar or a castle. The Albina case is one that he's taken as a lawyer about the legal chicanery and Israeli expropriation of land. And walk 3 devolves upon disagreement with a woman called Selma, who is part of the PLO and whose optimism about the betrayal of Oslo leaves him disillusioned and exasperated. Yet the stories of family and friends are intimately tied to the space that is being traversed. The specific hill or valley, the space, enables a narration of a particular story. So I'm going to talk about walking as knowledge production. So walking, as we all know, has, of course, long been a political activity. There are so many different kinds of walk. It's been a central component of social movements. Gandhi's Salt March. In the US, the Civil Rights March from Selma to Montgomery. The recent marches of the Black Lives Matter movement, as well as the ongoing marches for Palestine, have all called attention to their causes by transforming space through embodiment. Streets are taken over, traffic is redirected, and space is politicized. The American Indian movement in the US, and I apologize if a lot of my references are to the US because I am an American Studies scholar. The American Indian movement in the US has also led long walks across the country, 3,200-mile walk in 1978, and a 2,400-mile walk from San Francisco to Washington, D.C. in 2008 to call for tribal sovereignty and the protection of Indian sacred sites. Indeed, cultural geographers have seen indigenous walking as a form of knowledge production generated by performative and situated storytelling along paths and in places that are filled with meaning. So Shehade's text uses both narrative and non-narrative forms to write about his walks as an indigenous Palestinian way of thinking about the land. Most importantly, walking is a mnemonic practice, recalling previous walks as well as the imprinted histories of those belonging to the land. The very act of going on a sarha is a repetition of the act of previous generations of people who would escape the colonial administration and, as he says, go to the open hills, disappear for a whole day, sometimes for weeks and months, without a particular destination in mind. It is this freedom, the very ability to roam amidst a landscape now choked with settlements, roads and areas off limit to Palestinians, checkpoints that obstruct walking that the narrator wishes for and continues to assert as he walks the hills of Ramallah. This roaming is both spatial and temporal, as the narrator walks through space in the present and imbues space with history through the storehouse of cultural memory and storytelling. In the first sarha, the only one that takes place alone, he describes walking through Wadi el Warda, which is called the flower, noting the grass, the plants, walking over mossy cliffs dotted with flowers. However, at the center of the sarha is the memory of his uncle Abu Amin, who imbues the hills with historical density. Shehadeh finds a well-preserved kasar, stone structures where farmers had kept their produce and where Abu Amin might have camped. Standing over an abandoned kasar, he has, quote, a sense of the family who must have lived there, unquote. As a lawyer, he knows that the land was expropriated from the family because they were not residing there when the West Bank was occupied in 1967. But in walking, he repopulates it with previous owners. Perhaps the father watched his children play. Perhaps they planted vegetables. It was as though this Qasr time was petrified into an eternal present, he writes, making it possible for me to reconnect with my dead ancestor through this architectural wonder. As he literally enacts an archaeology of the past, digging into an odd-looking rock which he discovers to be a high-carved seat, he connects the land to the past and to his experience of the memory in the present. Recalling familial folklore, the narrator creates his own story of how Abu Amin, alone with his wife, Zarifeh, in the hills, as they slept in the open, cleared the land, built a kasar, and celebrated by dancing together. His complete comfort as he sits in the chair, built uncannily to his bodily dimensions, speaks to the unbroken continuity of Palestinian presence in and oneness with the land. So he is literally the land. This is how he describes his experience. Let's share. Whoever had designed this must have had similar proportions to mine. I settled myself in this monumental chair and did not want to move. A gentle breeze blew in my dusty face. My entire body relaxed from the neck down to my feet, and I settled more deeply in the stone seat and felt a perfect sense of peace come upon me. Beautiful description. So I focused on this particular sarha in some detail because it exemplifies Shehadeh's method of reclaiming the land through walking and addresses major concerns about the relationship between environmental, indigenous, and post-colonial thought. Many eco-critical scholars and writers valorize a wilderness not all, but many, untouched by the human. And you see the immense popularity of Richard Powers' The Overstory, which many of you might be familiar with. It was on the New York Times bestseller list for at least 2 or 3 years and has been seen like a major work of eco-criticism, minus people. So the popularity of this story as an ecological magnum opus, former post-colonial scholars such as Dipesh Chakravarti have likewise argued that the only legitimate inquiry is, today is the figure of the human in the age of the Anthropocene, rather than the tired dichotomies of colonialism. However, indigenous scholars such as Macarena Gomez Paris have called for decolonizing the Anthropocene. They focus instead on long-standing indigenous relationships to the land. Shehade's rendition of a landscape which continually evokes human presence demonstrates how eco-criticism, given to the cult of the non-human and nature alone without the human, can end up reinforcing the terra nullius of settler colonialism, so brutally captured in the Zionist slogan called, quote, a land without people for a people without land, unquote, which erased thousands of years of Palestinian presence in the land prior to 1948. What Shehadeh reanimates through his walks is a tended landscape, a domesticated landscape. He writes, my ancestors reclaimed the wild, possessed and domesticated it, making it their own. I would talk a little bit about liberating the senses. So narrating walking in the hills in the present moment and populating the hills with memory is therefore an act of reclamation, one that becomes more difficult as the Sahara continues and the occupation intensifies. And here I just want to bring in the Palestinian activist and Nadira and scholar whose name is Nadira Shalhoub Kevorkian. And she's written very eloquently about the colonial occupation of the senses. And I'll share with you here what she writes. Okay. She writes, by occupation of the senses, I refer to technologies that manage language, sight, sound, time, and space in the colony. The administration of who acts, who speaks, who gives birth and how, and who walks, moves, drives, where and how, and what kind of colors, cultures, and scenes are promoted and inscribed over the spaces, lives, and bodies of the colonized. Thus, my inquiry is concerned with the ways in which the settler colony uses sensory stimuli with the aim of invading the realm of experience of the colonized. And this is from an article called The Occupation of the Senses, which is just fantastic if you're not familiar with it. And just as Bernard Cohen, longstanding scholar, had written about colonialism as an invasion of epistemological space, not just territorial, Kevorkian has extended the violence of colonialism as one of sensual assault. Although her inquiry and her analysis pertains specifically to East Jerusalem, where she talks about, a pageant that is put up by Israel to literally invade the sentences. The occupation of senses is also evident in the increasingly constricted nature of space in Palestine. So taking a walk post-Oslo, for instance, the narrator of Palestinian Walks finds walking in the hills hazardous. Fears of slipping, falling, and losing his footing are mirrored in the settlements where the language of conquest is written large. His walk with Mustafa Barghouti in the later years after the Intifada is ironically in an Israeli nature reserve from which he is legally prohibited, and his circumvention of settlements while walking lead both the settlers into open sewers which run down in the valleys owned by the Palestinian farmers. And the smells of the open sewers sort of assault his senses. So experiencing the senses in a liberated kind of way becomes vital to the task of deoccupation or decolonization. So narrating the first Sarha, Shihade carefully documents the sensual experience of the walk, where he sees the valley, listens to, quote, the faint sound of the dripping water down to the pool. He stretches his hand to let the cold water run over it and smells the moist soil while looking at the mossy brown cliffs. So all the senses are involved in this act. By the end of the 1990s, when the times seem only bloodier and the grip of occupation increases, the scopic assault of the senses is heightened as the hills become a maze of barricades and the eye can only see settlements on top of the hills. Yet the narrator writes, quote, it was essential not to hesitate, but to venture out and take walks where it is still possible. Although walking evokes more recent memories of bloodshed, for instance, the murder of a Jewish settler in the same area by Bedouins, it remains vital to traverse the hills and expand the senses. Near Wadi Quef, they find themselves almost running over the hills, which were like brown tapestry. Away from checkpoints, quote, the experience of open space with no walks, no barriers, and a wide open sky made us giddy with joy. And I'm going to move now to naming, narrating, and sovereignty. So, in a well known masterly monograph on Euro American travel writing, Mary Louise Pratt describes European planetary consciousness that manifested itself in descriptions of native lands through what she calls the seeing eye, that imperiously orders everything in its gaze in order to control colonial difference. She analyzes the practice of naming native flora and fauna as part of the same knowledge formation. Quote, the naming, the representing, and the claiming are all one. The naming brings the reality of order into being. In the case of Palestine, the Hebraization of names of places continue to be a strategy of settler colonialism. Indeed, as Moshe Dayan would boast in 1969, do screen share here. Jewish villages were built in the place of Arab villages. You do not even know the names of these Arab villages, and I do not blame you. Nahal arose in the place of Malhur, Kibbutz Gavat in the place of Jipta, Kibbutz Sarid in the place of Hunifis. This was in April 1969, and it appeared in the Israeli newspaper, the Haaretz. Naming is clearly an act of power. Shihadi's attention to names of hills, villages, people who had lived in the lands, as well as the names of native plants in Palestinian walks, is then surely significant. It is important for Shihadi to call attention to names and delve into the anthropology of a field of thistle called Natsh, N-A-T-S-H, because it reveals the intimate connection of Palestinian lives to the land. Farmers use Natsh as a broom and dry the plant, and it's immensely useful in draining water. However, Israeli lawyers use the very existence of Natsh on the land to argue it's being uncultivated and therefore public lands that Israelis can use as they see fit. As he walks, the narrator incessantly names. Offering a cartography of cultural memory, he describes his walking path as one with two maqamat or shrines for holy men. One was called Maqam Abu Zayton and the other Maqam El Sheikh. Along the way, there were two springs, one that was fastest flowing and that had the sweeter water, remained active throughout the year and was called Ayn Jerut. The other was called Ayn Meta. The valley they are going to walk is called Wadi El Malaki, the Wadi of Meanings. He muses, quote, perhaps it was given this name because it connected many villages from the central hills and coastal plains. So in the face of cultural memoricide, Such acts of naming are acts of reclamation that Shihade enacts through the practice of the walk, associated with kinship, spatial freedom, and closeness to the land. However, it is important to note that these reclamations are not simply settler colonialism in reverse, attempts to control and dominate through a sovereignty which has at its disposal the means of violence and elimination and its goal of a hegemonic nationhood. That would simply be a replication of state sovereignty. The sovereignty that Shihade articulates through the act of walking, naming, seeing, and sensing is not one of violence and exclusion, but rather an indigenous sovereignty. It is a sovereignty that the scholar Moreton Robinson explains is embodied. It is ontological, our being, and epistemological, our way of knowing. In effect, it predates the apparatus of settler sovereignty. Interestingly, Shehadeh chooses to end the very last sarha with an encounter with a young armed Israeli settler. And this is really odd at the end of the work. As, as the settler reiterates colonial justifications for occupation, which are often progress, biblical land claims, racial superiority, to the narrator's intense exasperation, the story takes a turn as a settler invites the narrator to smoke a strong opiated hashish pipe with him. Although painfully conscious of their differences and anticipating a looming war ahead, he writes, quote, he and I could sit together for a respite, for a smoke, joined temporarily by our mutual love of the land. Shots could be heard in the distance, which made us both shiver, unquote. So rather than read this moment as one of dystopian reconciliation of occupation, which some people have seen it as such, or a rendition of an indigenous ethic of sharing, in other words, sharing is part of indigeneity, and therefore settler colonialism as such can be mitigated by acts of sharing. I read it as a clear statement of steadfastness and belonging to the land, what Palestinians have called sumud, which is the idea of just simply staying on the land. Only under the haze of hashish can settler colonialism be imagined as peaceful or individual contact be seen as a solution to the violence of occupation. Indeed, I see it as a denial of the fact that through individual contact, everything can be simply solved. It is not an attention to the structure of settler colonialism. So I want to just make a bit of a foray into walking, survivance, and Gaza. So recently, videos, photographs, postings on social media have all narrated to us the spectacle of 500,000 Gazans, young and old, women, men, and children, the frail and the sick, making their way, walking from the south of Gaza to the north. Reversing their forced marches as multiply displaced refugees, Gazans walked back home, knowing full well that they were returning to destruction. Carrying their possessions on their backs, many walked back in hopes of reuniting with loved ones or finding the remains of those who were martyred. Yet, although tired and traumatized after 15 months of genocide, many of them walked back with a sense of pride. Bisan Auda, who many of you might be familiar with, who posts on Instagram, who has been tirelessly reporting since the beginning of the genocide with her signature opening, "This is day, whatever the day is of the genocide, and I'm still alive," reported her joy at returning through a very bodily connection. And I'll just play a little bit of that video here, if I can. Okay, so I'm not sure this will work, but we'll give it a shot.
It started to smell like Gaza. We are walking back to our land. We are walking back to our home after 15 months under their eyes, but they cannot do anything to prevent us
Yeah,
from
there is
being
some sound from the background. Please,
out.
please keep yourself mute. There's sound from the background. Please mute your phones.
This is the first return for the Palestinians, and not going to be the end with the last return. Okay, we still need
The sound still goes on.
lands that were passing really slowly.
Please see to it that all your phones are on mute,
Like,
or laptops, whatever you all are using.
this moment will come. But when, how, I was not sure, but you're right. Again, in Gaza.
Okay, so I just wanted to share her thing of how she's walking and emphasizing sort of the sensuality of walking. It's starting to smell like Gaza. Having reported on the genocide for almost 500 days, fully aware of the destruction of schools, hospitals, homes, and the denial of basic necessities, Bisan chose to narrate the walk as one of victorious reclamation. And Ali Abu Nima of the Electronic Intifada, which is a blog, a newspaper, narrated this walking as a vision of a continual walk, a walk of Palestinians back to their homes that they were forced to abandon in the Nakba of 1948. Share the screen once more. So this is a cartoon that was done in January 27th. It represents the walking to North Gaza as a return to Jerusalem on a road without checkpoints, walls, or barbed wire. So it's an imaginative walk, which is continuing the walk which the refugees made back to North Gaza, but it's an imagined walk, and it has the optimism that I see also in Palestinian walks that I shared with you. So all these narratives demonstrate what Indian, when I say Indian, I mean Indian in North America, the scholar Gerald Wisner has called survivance, which is an active sense of presence over absence, deracination, and oblivion. It's a continuance of stories and not a mere reaction. And I'll stop here. If you have any questions, comments, I would love to have them. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Malini. And now it is open for questions. And thank you, Professor Malini, for this enlightening talk on Palestine walks and how walking is so important. Like, as the Saraha walk and how it has been it's an historically localized activity, and how people have used it to reconnect to the land's depth, its saturation with living historical and communal presence. It was indeed very illuminating talk for us, and some like uh, Raja Sahadev we have read, but this is not very common amidst as Indian writers. But there are many people, like especially those from the mountain areas and all. They have talked about the importance of walking. Now, this Palestinian walks. Which is notes of the vanishing landscape. It connects to the anthropocentrism, as you said, and how walking in the lands and documentary Israeli colonialist policies show the extent to which Israel was seeking to relive it through its natural and social landscape of Palestine. Thank you. It was very illuminating. This was not a question, but just my observation, because I was really elated to hear your lecture. And that video did not work fine with it. I thought somebody was intervening, so I intervened. Anyway, it's open to question if
You
people.
want me to play it again?
If it plays, then it's fine. I was not able to view it.
Do you want me to play it again?
Yes, you can.
Okay.
কোশ্চেন হ্যাঁ করব
It's a little long, so I just wanted to show the parts of her walking. I'm just going to grab my water from the other side. Oh goodness, I got to skip the ads. Okay.
Started to smell like gum. We are walking back to our land. We are walking back to our home after 15 months. Do anything to prevent us from getting back. I'm walking now. The checkpoint. There, behind me, the American soldiers. This is the first return for the Palestinians, and not going to be the end, the last return. Okay, Mr.
And then I just moved ahead to.
I've never thought that I will be able to come here safe. You know, I was 100% sure that this moment will come. But when how, I was not sure. But your mind, again, مغزة. أنا في الرمال، أنا في الرمال.
Okay, so I played some
Okay.
again.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. If anybody had any question, you all can ask.
Madam,
Unmute yourself
madam,
and
I have
ask
a
the
question.
question.
Madam, I have a question.
Yes.
Madam,
Just tell us who you are speaking, like what's your name, and then ask the question.
madam, I am Abhishek Upadhyay. I study in Midnapur City College, English MA first year.
Okay.
Madam, I have heard that you have said in several times that Israeli settlers. Madam, as I have read that the land of Israel is the promised land of the God according to Torah, and the Muslim had captured in the medieval age from the Jews. And so, is it right to call the Jews the colonialists?
Sorry, I missed the last part of the question. Could you repeat that?
Madam, is it right to call the Jewish people the colonialists in the Israeli island?
Oh, is it right? Yeah, if you see it from, okay, so the fact is that a lot of the claims of, when you're talking about biblical land claims, those biblical land claims basically erase 3,000 years of Palestinians living in the land. One thing that I think people also need to remember that when you're talking about Palestinians, you're not only talking about Muslims. The people who are Palestinians who have lived continuously on the land, and historians have talked about this, and the archaeological excavations and so on. But historians have talked about the fact that the people who lived on the land that is called Palestine, which actually has been referred to in histories and so on for going back to about 11 something BC, in different versions of the name Palestine, included people who were of different faiths. Obviously, Christianity comes later, but all these people, it is believed, then many of them converted to Islam later. But these are all a heterogeneous group of people who live there. So you're not only talking about Muslims. But yes, the reason you can think about, or Israel is definitely a colonial state, is it follows the exact pattern of settler colonialism. In other words, it is a state that was formed in 1948 through the United Nations, which had taken over after the British. The British were doing that colonization. I don't know if you also know, and sorry, you asked me a question that I can take an hour to respond to, but I don't know if many of you know that initially when the society, the Zionists were thinking about a place where Jewish people could go and settle, Argentina was a major place that they talked about. Argentina, they also talked about parts in Uganda. They explored these possibilities, but then they decided that if they could revive a messianic narrative, the one that you have mentioned here, it would be a lot more easier to sell. And therefore, the Jewish National Fund starts buying up land which is never then to be sold back to anybody other than Jewish people. So the structure of settler colonialism is you take land from people who have been there. You drive them out slowly. I mean, this the idea of being eliminated from the land, and you continue policies that will marginalize the population there. So, and I have not made up this settler colonialism. Israel has been seen as settler colonialism, as settler colonial by pretty much every scholar in settler colonial and indigenous studies, starting with someone like Patrick Wolf, whose seminal work I mentioned here, and also by a lot of activists who saw parallels between another settler colonial state of a different kind, which is South Africa, and the kind of policies of apartheid and separation that were enacted in South Africa. So I don't know if this answers your question, Abhishek, but I thank you very much for that question.
Thank you, madam.
Thank you, madam.
Is there anybody else who wants to ask a question? And thank you, madam, for that elaborate answer. Uh, now, anybody else wants to ask a question?
Ma'am, I have a question.
Sure.
Okay.
Ma'am, my name is Ayan Datto. I'm studying my master's from
You're
Midapur City
very
College.
distant. Can you come? I don't know if you have it on speaker, but you're very distant. I can't hear you very well.
Okay,
I'll turn
ma'am,
up my
I'm going.
volume. Okay. Go ahead. Yeah, I can hear you now. Sorry. I didn't hear that last bit. Who was saying what? Yes. Yes. Survivance. Yeah. Right, right. I mean, obviously, the fact of the material fact of the means of violence which are there and which people like Radha Shah, they, don't have. I think it can be challenged only through creating a solidarity. Um, I mean, I don't think that uh, this literally means, something like being able to challenge the power of violence. But on the other hand, I think the very walking that I referred to the end, and I haven't had time to think about it as carefully as one should. The very acts of uh, walking back to the land which they were not forced to do, by the way. It was made available. The very act of steadfastly staying in the land. And there've been so many interviews with people who have been asked, what do you think about this latest proposal of ethnic cleansing? Where you must have heard it, must be shocked, about making Gaza the Riviera of the Middle East by Donald Trump, um, has been actually sort of laughed at by people who are insisting that they will continue to stay on the land, and so on. And so that's why I was looking at that act of sort of walking back, which was not only walking but staying, being connected, and showing their continuous presence and memories of the land. So I think both things. I don't know whether a work of writing such as that can materially do something, but it is inspirational in terms of solidarity for sure. I don't know if that answers your question. Well, I do think that actually the other parts of walking that I mentioned, the non-stop protests that have taken place, um, eventually I do think they are going to make a difference. I mean, uh, part of these, protests, and this, I'm going to a different kind of area here, um, did play some effect in the recent elections that we had in the U.S., which was a protest against a party that has not taken their unstinted, unwavering support for Israel, had not moved away from that or questioned it at all. And I do think that the people who, especially the younger people who stayed home and refused to vote Democratic as they might have, did play a role in sort of sending out the message that we are not going to sit by and take this as they cannot take the votes for granted. So that's another part of the walking as in protest. I think that yeah, there's certainly not indigenous protests, but yeah, pre-Palestine for sure. Yes. Well, if I'm not a politician. I don't have the means at me, but I think that people who are working for Palestine, um, Edward Said was right when he said the best solution, the only solution was one state, everybody having democratic rights, right? I don't think that there are any people in power in Palestine that ever saw that as a solution, because this was part of, again, the settler colonial mandate, right? Why should you have people with the same kind of rights when you can actually drive them away? And this was something that started in 1948. I mean, at the present moment, I don't know if the Arab states have the will to unite and come together and put pressure, but many of them are client states of the US. So, who's to say? But I mean, if I think if Saudi Arabia would turn off its oil for a little while, it would make a big difference. But they have not shown any inclination to do something like that. So I think the best you can hope for is just the end of the war, and then who knows? Uh, uh, yeah, I'm hearing you, but I'm a little confused about your question. Like, which people, and you said people are getting accused. I'm not sure which people you're talking about and which. Oh, I mean, there has to be a political solution, and you have to recognize that, Palestinians have a right to exist. I mean, the fact of the matter is that, right from the beginning, people like Golda Meir said, there's no such thing as Palestine, there's no such thing as Palestinian people. So if you start with this basic lack of recognition, and again, this goes, I mean, the similarities between this and say the situation of the Indians in North America is uncanny. Because there was also the idea that these people simply don't exist. The idea that this is just bare land. So the solution has to be to have a political recognition of people. Now, whether that forms in the state, in the forming of a two-state, which is also pathetic because the way that the settlements are in the West Bank, and I don't know if you've been there, I have. Um, it has been totally divided up, and Oslo was sort of the death knell of any liberation, but it has been totally divided into settlements and so on. So if you and those areas are off limits to Palestinians. So if those even if you had something like a state, it would be so chopped up that the solution would be for many of the settlements to be dismantled and people move to 48 Israel and then have something like a two-state thing. That would be the only political solution. And I think that if you had a political situation, you would not have this war. But there has not been a political solution ever offered to the Palestinians since 1948. Let's hope.
Okay. Thank you, madam. Is there any more questions? Fine. Uh, yeah. So, madam, that was really an illuminating talk of yours, and the discussion that uh, ensued after your talk is a testimonial to the fact that your talk has indeed have had an impact on everyone. Thank you for being with us, and it was indeed our privilege. Thank you. Thank you very much, madam.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I guess I'll log off. Thank you, Mr. Chakravarti, for arranging this. I appreciate it. And anyone, I would love to have questions or comments. You have my email. I'll be working on this for a while because it was very much a beginning talk in progress, paper in progress. So if anybody has suggestions or questions, please feel free to reach out to me. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, madam.